These are some photographs that I shot on film, and I think they turned out great. So pretty. Some of these even had people asking me what camera I shot these with and what film I used. The answer is not the same for every photo, but what they all have in common is that they were not shot with a really expensive, fancy camera, nor were they shot with premium film. It's quite a basic one actually, and in this video I want to talk about just that. One of my favourite 35mm films that I think is also perfect for beginners, and some would even go as far as saying that it's the only 35mm film that you really need. So let's talk about it.
I still hear the words you told me.
So let's get straight to the point. The film I want to chat with you about today is Kodak Gold 200. Kodak Gold, that film you can just buy at the drugstore. Not the premium and expensive Portra 400, nor the even more expensive Portra 800, just good old Kodak Gold. In this video, I'd like to share why I personally like this film a lot, and what characteristics appeal to me, show you lots of examples, and also share a couple lessons that I've learned over the years that help me to get the best possible results with this film. Kodak Gold's history actually begins back in the 80s as far as I've understood Kodak's history. Back then, there was a film called Kodacolor VRG200 that was Kodak's mass-market color-negative film. Nowadays, Kodak Gold is still just that. It's the mass-market film, just with a couple decades of extra research and refinement. So in a way, it's the current refined version of the film that maybe your parents used to shoot the photos of your childhood. Depending on your age, obviously. Maybe you were the parents. But what does mass-market consumer film even mean? In Kodak's case, this refers to the film's positioning in the overall lineup of films. Other Kodak films you might have heard of are, for example, the Portra line, including Portra 160, 400, and Portra 800. Those films intend to produce slightly different results that are more geared towards professionals who seek a higher level of consistency, accurate skin tones, even finer grain, and I suppose more neutral colours that leaves room for some colour grading in post. Except Portra 800. That film is somehow really saturated from the get-go. On the other hand, Kodak Gold is a more direct path to the final result, as it is more saturated and contrasty with the intention to just be shot and scanned and look fine. So let's have a bit of a closer look at those characteristics of Kodak Gold 200. As the name indicates, one important thing to keep in mind is the ISO of 200. This is a medium to low ISO, so it is still fairly flexible, but noticeably less flexible than something like Portra 800. The ISO is just the sensitivity of the film and how strongly it reacts to light, which results in a brighter or darker exposure. So ISO 800 film is more sensitive and will have a stronger reaction to light. What this means is that when shooting in slightly darker lighting situations, it is easier to do so with ISO 800, whereas with ISO 200, it can get a little tricky. What this means in practice is that getting shots with Kodak Gold 200 on a bright sunny day is perfectly fine, even on overcast days if it's not too dark. But indoors it can get a little tricky to achieve a sharp photo. This hasn't stopped me from trying anyway, but here are some examples of what that can look like. The photo is exposed alright, but it's shaky and blurry because the shutter speed had to compensate the low ISO. Nevertheless, overall the film is quite flexible and can be used in many different lighting situations. You just need to keep in the back of your mind that once it gets a little dark, things become harder, except you're shooting a subject that can be lit up with a flash, in which case the flash will help you out. Other characteristics worth mentioning are the colour and contrast. The film's white balance is neutral, but the overall colour palette seems to favour a bit of a warm look. The contrast and saturation levels that I get are pretty much what I'd expect from Kodak's description. The film is already quite saturated and has a decent level of contrast, so the look is already sort of baked in for the most part. Whether that's a good or bad thing is subjective and up to you, but personally, I wouldn't be making this video if I didn't like it. Before we talk about what exactly I love about Kodak Gold, we need to briefly talk about film scanning because it seems to me that this is a topic that many people don't quite understand just yet, and it leads to some confusion when it comes to the look of film, so let's just clear that up real quick. I'm often asked whether my film photos are edited, and this question is unfortunately not a simple one that can be answered with a yes or no. That is because the process of digitizing film in itself is editing, but I don't think that's the kind of editing that the person asking is referring to. When shooting film and then producing digital copies of the photos by scanning the film, you are essentially taking a digital photo of the negative. This is the case when using a scanner or using a digital camera as a scanner, which is what I do, and it is at this point that you begin to create an interpretation of the film because there is no such thing as a correct scan that will produce the look that the film is supposed to produce. This is why when you let a lab develop and scan the photos that you shot on Kodak Gold, the scans you get from them might look quite different to my scans of Kodak Gold. And if you'd give those negatives to 3 other labs, you'd again receive 3 different looking results because every lab has their own unique scanning setup and their own technicians who will correct the scans for you. So even just the choice of scanning device, be it a Noritsu scanner or, like in my case, a Sony a7 IV, what you receive is the interpretation of your device's sensor and the conversion software, which in fact I'd argue is the biggest factor. I personally use a Adobe Lightroom plugin called Negative Lab Pro, and while it's great, it consistently gives me an initial conversion that I think can rather objectively be defined as incorrect and in need of correction. That is why I personally view the post-processing that I do more as color correction rather than editing in the color grading sense, because I think what people are referring to when they ask me if my photos are edited is the more color grading style enhancing kind of editing that I do with my digital photography. I think you get the point. It's a little more nuanced than a yes or no. The reason I'm telling you this is that it is in big part this scanning process in which I decide whether I like a film or not. Once I get my initial conversion, I can see an estimate of what the film itself produced. The look of Kodak Gold is not really a fixed thing, it's more just the base layer of what ends up becoming the look of my photograph. And so when I say that Kodak Gold has some decent saturation, what I mean is that the initial conversion doesn't feel over or undersaturated, it looks fine to me. And once I have a decent collection of photographs, or maybe even a photo project of sorts, I like to present that on my online portfolio that I made with Squarespace, who are also a continuous partner of the channel who make my work here possible. I myself have been using Squarespace for over 5 years at this point, and it's perfect for people like me who are creatives but not web developers. They're an all-in-one platform, so with your subscription you can make a website, host your content, register your own domain name, sell products, track analytics, and much more. They have this lovely intuitive drag-and-drop editor called Fluid Engine, which is so easy to use and lets you customize the layout and design of your page. If you need some help when getting started, you can start off with one of the many professional and beautifully designed templates, which you can then customize to suit your own style. Or you can work with Squarespace's AI, which enables you to build a website in minutes by describing it and answering a few questions. All in all, what I think Squarespace is great at is combining creative freedom with ease of use, which I really appreciate. Try it out for yourself. You can head to squarespace.com for a 14-day free trial, and then when you're ready to launch your website, you can go to squarespace.com/TeoCrawford to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for continuously supporting the channel. So let's have a closer look at some photos and then talk about some tips to get the best possible results with this film. If you've been following me for some time, you might know this already, but I like my photos quite stylized. When shooting digital, I like to play around in post-production, and the final looks I end up with tend to be on the more stylized, not so neutral side. And so when I began shooting film, I of course tried out all sorts of films, and I've found that Kodak Gold hits that balance that I like. It's already saturated and tastefully contrasty without going overboard. For my personal taste, Kodak Ultramax, for example, goes a little overboard and just comes out a little too intense looking, at least in my scans. Now, let's talk about how to get the best possible results with Kodak Gold 200. In my opinion, one of the main factors that should be considered is something that should be considered in photography generally, but especially when shooting film and more so when shooting Kodak Gold, which is to know what lighting is actually going to look good. So by learning to differentiate good lighting from bad lighting, you can avoid many shots that you might have considered taking, but then didn't because the lighting was just no good. I actually do this all the time. I see a potential photograph, but then stop and realize it's not really worth it because the lighting is just bad. So what is good or bad lighting, you might ask? Well, this is a bit of a complex topic, so I don't really want to dive into all of that in this video, but generally speaking, you might have noticed in the photographs I've shown you so far in this video that I think Kodak Gold works really well in sunlight, especially during golden hour. The more sideways the light is, the better. So I avoid shooting in the high midday sun, but I feel very comfortable shooting in the earlier or later hours of the day. This doesn't mean, however, that Kodak Gold doesn't look good in soft lighting on overcast days. You just kind of need to know how to work with that lighting. Here are 2 examples. In this shot, I find that the colours of the photograph compensate the lack of interesting lighting. And in this shot, the lighting outside is flat, but I'm inside shooting stuff by a window, so the lighting becomes directional because the left side just falls off into darkness, which adds a lot of shape to everything, which makes it work. Quick side note, this is a long process of learning. Please do not feel discouraged or intimidated to shoot film because you feel lacking in your knowledge of lighting. To this day, so many of my photographs on a roll of film are pretty much useless because the lighting just didn't turn out as good as I thought it would, even though I have a decent understanding of lighting. That is just how photography works. Mistakes are natural and a never-ending part of the process. And as much as theoretical studies are important and useful, in the end, I think you can only really progress a lot by actually practicing and making mistakes and shooting bad photos, because the bad photos are the path to the good photos. Just wanted to add that to not make all of this sound too intimidating. On the more technical side, I can highly recommend carefully considering your exposure and not shying away from overexposing. Film is rather flexible when overexposed. The photo can be recovered more easily than when you mistakenly underexpose. So when shooting, I like to think about what my priority is. Do I want to keep shadow details, or do I not mind losing them and embrace a more contrasty look? Here are 2 examples. In this shot, I didn't really care whether the structure of the clouds is visible because there wasn't really much to see there anyway. It's mostly just white. On the other hand, the foreground is what I'm actually focusing on here, and I really want this to be clearly visible and not too dark. Thus, I overexposed to the point that the clouds are just white and there's no structure there, but I have a clear foreground, which I think looks good. On the other hand, in this shot, I don't mind that a significant portion of the frame is literally just black, because there wasn't really much to see there anyway, and what I want to focus on here is the area lit up in the sunlight. Thus, it was not really necessary to strongly overexpose. So while Kodak Gold is rather flexible, I would still recommend thinking about these things when deciding how to expose your photo if you're really trying to get the best possible result from the film. Just for reference, when you see my photos in this video, there is a very high chance that they were overexposed. I usually overexpose by 1 or even 2 stops and then recover the photo later in the scanning process, which gives me great results. This is, by the way, one of the main reasons for which I do the scanning myself, so that I have this control. If you drop your film off at a lab, you usually lose control of this, except your lab is special and really wants to work with you individually and take note of your preferences. I suppose that depends on the lab. And this is also sort of my last point to getting good results. You need to get a good scan. You can get all the previous points right with excellent lighting and a good exposure, but if the scan is bad, the photo is unfortunately going to look bad. I know this can be a little frustrating because scanning is quite the process and investment, so I would recommend working on this step by step. There's no rush. It took me about 5 years to optimize my workflow and set up to the point that I think I'm pretty happy with it now. So I don't think you should rush these things. It's all just a process. And if you really don't want to get into scanning, you can also just try to find a really good lab, but I'm afraid I can't really help you with that because that is super dependent on your location. Anyway, that sums up what I love about Kodak Gold, why I like it, and how, in my experience, you can get the best results from the film. I hope some of this can be of any value to you on your film photography journey. Before saying goodbye, I'd like to say a massive thank you to the lovely people supporting me and my work on Patreon. Thank you so much to each one of you. If you're interested in tutorials on color grading and film scanning and stuff like that, you can check out my page via the link in the description. Also, I have a print job, by the way, in case that is of interest to you, also in the description. With that said, I hope to see you again soon. Until then, goodbye.